lot of the science is saying that the sea level rise is coming sooner rather than later, especially these really accelerated rates of sea level. So this is a glimpse at our near future. We're going to be seeing these kind of impacts with high tide, high surf flooding events more and more often along our shoreline. I think it's indicative of what we are likely to see more often in the coming decades. This could be equivalent to what our normal high tide may be in 10, 20, 30 years with global sea level rise. It's going to be a real challenge. I mean, obviously we have these really big hotels built right up on the shoreline. On the other hand, there's a lot of money in this area to mitigate it, either through engineering, possibly through trying to restore the beach, build the beach out. They'll have their struggles here. Places, the more remote places in islands will also have their own troubles too, because there just isn't the money to address the issues there. So the challenges will vary from one place to another.
My name is Ty Emanuel. I'm the Vice President of the Board here at Royal Kahana Resort in West Maui. We're a few miles north of Lahaina town. So this is really the top of our system. We were rebuilding a system that had not held up as well as we would have liked, so we started using non-biodegradable materials. And these top black bags are really the cap of a much larger system underneath. And these are mostly just to give us a little bit more height and stop some of the overwash that we get in the winter. Sandy Beach is a tremendous asset. People come to Hawaii to go to the beach. And places that don't have beach access have to change their advertising. Their rental rates typically are lower than a comparable property that has direct beach access to a dry sandy beach. And you deal with much happier guests when you have a beach and they don't have to walk 3 blocks down the street to a public park. So there's a definite tourism impact. There's a property value impact because these condos are all individually owned and the sale price is directly affected by the rental potential usually, and that is directly affected by the presence of a beach. The beach also serves its protective purpose by absorbing a lot of the wave energy before it gets to the lawn, the walls, the structures, things like that.
My name is Tara Owens. I am a coastal geologist working for the University of Hawaii Sea Grant program. And I'm in a cost share position with the County of Maui, so I work very closely with the county planners, the coastal zone management planners who deal with and respond to shoreline issues and coastal development. As is the case with a lot of the beaches in West Maui, the beaches are narrowing over time. So over the long run, we're seeing a situation of chronic erosion as sea level rises up and moves closer to the buildings and to the development and moves Mauka inland. The beaches narrow as we go.
Flooding of the coast caused by global warming has already begun, and scientists' warnings that the rise of the sea would eventually imperil the United States coastline are no longer theoretical. So I want to begin with a brief reminder of why we are concerned with climate change. The year 2016 was the warmest year on record.
There's absolutely no question that human production of greenhouse gases, including carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and some other greenhouse gases, is causing global climate change. It's causing global warming, and the warming atmosphere is causing the climate to change in various ways that you might not expect. The Arctic is warming faster than the global average.
And of course, we have Greenland and Antarctica. We monitored both of those ice masses using a satellite that weighs them every 10 days. It's very sensitive to the gravity field. You can see that Greenland is melting from the coastline up. There's still some net snow accumulation on the plateau, but overall, our satellite record shows declining ice mass at 281 billion tons of ice a year.
And the temperature difference between the Arctic and the lower latitudes or the equator is lessening.
Antarctica is especially worrisome. We keep hearing reports on the West Antarctic ice sheet. In fact, scientists have declared that the West Antarctic ice sheet is in a state of irreversible retreat.
We can't stop sea level rise. We cannot stop global warming at this point. The climate system has enormous inertia. And by that I mean, imagine in your room where you are right now that I placed an ice cube on the table. That ice cube is out of equilibrium with the temperature of your room. It's going to take a number of minutes for that ice cube to melt. That ice cube is out of equilibrium. It has inertia. It doesn't just melt like that. Neither does the Greenland ice sheet or the West Antarctic ice sheet or the alpine glaciers of the world. The heat absorption by the ocean, taking heat out of the atmosphere and storing it in the water, which causes the ocean to expand, that doesn't happen instantaneously. This climate inertia plays out over centuries, and there are a number of studies, reproduced and verified modeling results that show that sea level rise is going to continue for centuries, perhaps up to 1,000 years and beyond. You can't stop global warming or sea level rise, so we have to adapt to it.
Sunday services at Calvary by the Sea Lutheran Church. As its name suggests, this clamshell-shaped sanctuary is oceanfront in Aina.
But that view is my biggest rival. It means I have to really do my homework for my sermons, or else I look at a lot of sleeping people. So I really need to do my job well.
This church literally pays homage in many ways to the sea. The oceanside theme is unmistakable, and in recent years it's begun to weigh heavily on Pastor Tim.
Thanks be to God.
He attended a sea level rise workshop run by DLNR last year.
Shine forth, you that are enthroned upon the cherubim.
And in addition to leading his congregation in worship each Sunday, he's thinking about where to build his next church once the ocean takes over.
We are feeling the effects of ocean rise. It doesn't matter whether you believe in climate change or not. All you have to do, if you have eyes to see, and it's not a question of believing, it's just looking. And where we are, we see the changes. And one of the things that's happened in this last year, and it's never happened before, is on our property, which is very low, and we've always had king tides. We just started talking about them, that's it. They've always been there. But we've actually had water come up, and we have naupaka plants out here. We do not have a wall. Walls don't do anything. The naupaka, they keep the ground solid, but what's happened is the water has actually come up and around the naupaka tree bushes, and that's a great worry. I mean, when we've had tsunamis come in, if you look carefully, the ground goes down a little bit, and the tsunami would, the last one we had actually flooded the floor.
During one of 2016's King Tides events, Pastor Tim met with Sam Limo of the state's Office of Conservation and Coastal Lands.
And since we're right on the water, and it's part of our responsibility
help take care of the island and the plants. What can we do to help you guys?
The property has a good barrier of naupaka between the beach and the church, but when there's water inundation from high tides, tsunamis, or sea level rise, the plants will do little to stop flooding. Adaptation in this church's case probably means moving away from the coast. That means making some hard and expensive decisions sooner rather than later.
A decision would have to be made, I think within 10 years, because I don't want to be cynical, but property values, who's going to want to buy property that they know in 20 years is going to be underwater? What's that going to do to the real estate market? And how would that affect if the idea for us to move, it's going to be very expensive. Right now, this property is worth millions, but in 30 years, it's going to be worth, well, we don't know. It's going to be underwater. A couple houses up the valley, they're going to have beachfront property in their living rooms. 10 years, we have to make a decision, because 30 years, my prediction, this will probably be uninhabitable.
So, by changing our behavior today so that we have a lower carbon footprint, we are essentially loving our grandchildren more than we love ourselves. We will put ourselves through the discomfort and inconvenience of changing our lifestyles so that our grandchildren don't have to suffer the very worst effects of climate change decades and even half a century from now.
Here, farther east along Kalanianaole Highway, at the Monolua Bay boat ramp, and at many other coastal properties, and even far inland, last year's series of king tides created top-of-mind awareness about the future. A future with higher seas, more flooding, more erosion, and damage and destruction of both private and public infrastructure.
Well, the king tide events of 2017 set record high water levels in Hawaii. These king tides are an opportunity for the Hawaiian community to take note of the fact that we're experiencing flooding above and beyond what had ever been experienced before. The king tide flooding is in the category of nuisance flooding. There wasn't any real damage done. And the media needs to continue to put that message out that this is a red flag. It's not an alarm bell. It is a red flag that waters are now reaching higher than ever before. And there's no doubt, the science is rock solid, that rises in sea level will continue to push these high tide events further and further into our awareness, so that within a couple of decades, perhaps sooner, these nuisance flooding events will become actual damaging events.
We've also modeled future erosion. Here is the line of erosion under 1 meter sea level rise. Now, compared to all that flooding...
Dr. Fletcher and his team of graduate students at the University of Hawaii have been working with DLNR to model the impacts of sea level rise along Hawaii's shoreline. Their work can be viewed in the recently released Hawaii Sea Level Rise Vulnerability and Adaptation Report, available on the Hawaii Climate Adaptation Portal.
So here is our sea level flooding at 3 feet at 1 meter for the Ewa Beach region. And in green is really flooding due to a higher water table. The water table rises as sea level rises. So this is not marine flooding. This is dry land turning into wetland. Now, what does it look like at 6 feet? Now we get marine flooding at 2 meters. They're high, intermediate, or high scenario for NOAA. Basically, permanently drowning Ewa Beach. If you stand there and the ocean's coming, you're going to lose. If you build up so that the ocean can flow underneath, and if you...
Fletcher and his group also model or predict wave inundation or run-up for populated coastlines around the state.
We get large swell events that hit the south shores of the islands every summer from the southern hemisphere. There's our model for today's wave run-up. Here we are for half a foot of sea level rise. This is 1 foot of sea level rise. You'll notice there's not dramatic flooding taking place, and We think this is a result of what's known as the critical point. As sea level rises to a fixed topography of the coastal plain, at first you don't see much impact, and then all of a sudden you breach a certain topographic threshold, and all of a sudden you see dramatic impact. Here's 2 feet. You're starting to see flooding over in this part of Eva. And someplace between 2 and 3 feet, in other words, just below 1 meter, is where we continuously see this critical point. So at 1 meter of sea level rise, you see dramatic flooding suddenly taking place.
On the opposite side of the Eva Plain, on Oahu's north shore at Ka'iki Beach, for decades Mark Glazier and his family have observed the impacts of erosion caused by winter swells. They watch as sand appears in the summer, disappears in the winter, and then reappears. They don't always make the connection between the growing severity of winter beach erosion with increasing sea levels. Nonetheless, Mark and a half dozen of his neighbors got proactive.
We pulled together because in front of our property on the beach, we've had so much sand erosion from the large waves coming and chewing out our property line, where our bushes and our trees are starting to fall into the beach and we're losing property. We petitioned the DLNR for a sand mining permit. So what that does is we can get tractors, push up the sand that's in front of our house, and to change our erosion, because it was a cliff. And so we were able to push up enough sand to make it at a decent taper.
This solution, albeit a temporary one, will not work for every coastal property owner. He reiterates something you heard earlier. The value of a beach property in Hawaii is typically much higher than homes inland.
Well, let me put it this way. My neighbor just sold his house for $2.5 million. It's a tiny little house on a tiny little lot. It's a nice house, but the house behind him, which is on the same property, but it's not beachfront, is valued at $900,000. So it's, you know, it's over double being on the beachfront.
This harsh economic reality is something countless coastal property owners, both private and public, will need to consider and adapt to as the ocean rises.
The reality is no one's going to get out of this without being harmed. The pendulum is going to shift to a situation where we have to make some very hard choices, you know, regarding whether to stay in place and engineer our way out of it, or pick up whole areas or communities and move them Mauka. The cost of that is going to be very extreme.
Climate change is real. Hawaii is seeing the impacts firsthand. Tides are getting higher, biodiversity is shrinking, coral is bleaching, coastlines are eroding, weather is becoming more extreme. We must acknowledge these realities here at home first. And that's why Hawaii's leadership is united on tackling climate change.
Coming up, the Climate Change Commission and the political and economic will to adapt as rising seas in Hawaii continues.
This is called seasonal wave inundation. Every year, the islands get pummeled by gigantic northwest open ocean swells. And each year, as that sea level rises, the effect of these swells are going to be more severe, and they're going to reach further inland. And so there will be certainly an increased threat from these types of events in the future.
We're all learning new phrases that are becoming common to our language in this island state. Sea level rise, wave inundation, sand depletion, coastal erosion, coastal infrastructure. These are the words and images of a future that has already arrived.
The county bike path is being undermined by a large swell. This is one of the issues with respect to the impact of sea level rise. We have increased erosion, increased wave inundation, increased damage to our coastal infrastructure. So this bike path here might have to be relocated in the future.
Sam Limo, administrator of the state's Office of Conservation and Coastal Lands, is on the front lines of dealing with our vulnerability to rising seas and how, as a Hawaiian society, we can and must adapt.
Due to global warming, we stand to suffer some very serious consequences from one of the major consequences of global warming, which is sea level rise. Hawaii has about 750 miles of coastline, and many of those coastal areas are currently experiencing severe erosion effects. Sea level has risen a number of inches over the past century, and as a consequence, our shorelines are retreating, and we're experiencing flooding in low-lying areas as we speak. In the future, sea level is anticipated to accelerate, and we have an opportunity to understand the extent of that acceleration and potentially plan for it. But the consequences that we're going to experience is increased erosion along our coastal areas, increased flooding, and increased economic and social losses across the island chain.
What lies ahead is the subject of some debate. But scientists like the University of Hawaii's Chip Fletcher, also a frontline expert on climate change, are convinced the coming decades and centuries, the world we leave for future generations, will absolutely require everyone to adapt and adjust.
We're going to start to see the end of Sunset Beach and other similar beaches. So we are modeling this process of beach erosion as well. The third thing we're modeling is groundwater inundation and storm drain flooding. So in the coastal plain, the low-lying land around the coastline where most of our development is located, there is the water table, and in the Waikiki, Honolulu area, that water table at high tide lies within 2 feet of the ground surface. And if you add rainfall to that, or if you bump that up with a king tide or a higher ocean water level event, you can begin to see groundwater inundation. And groundwater inundation is where the water table actually breaks out on the land surface and creates a wetland.
While looming rising sea levels seem practically and economically daunting for Hawaii, our state is especially suited as a leader in adapting for what lies ahead.
This year, and so part of our agenda today is to get a preview of those outcomes.
4 years ago, lawmakers passed an act that laid the groundwork for addressing sea level rise and other climate change impacts.
So, what is the Sea Level Rise report all about?
That resulted in the development first of an interagency climate committee, which last year switched to a state climate commission. The commission has accepted its first report, which addresses technical aspects of sea level rise adaptation and mitigation, and will serve as a guidepost for political leaders to begin making plans and the tough decisions necessary to ensure a bright future.
So I'd like to make some suggestions to the Commission on priorities. Certainly,
in the development of the report, hundreds of people from all walks of life and from all across the state got engaged in discussions and workshops on sea level rise.
A lot of our facilities, like the airports, harbors, and coastal highways are inundation zones. And if we were to, move them inland or, realign the highways, and then where would we get, to echo what Justice Wilson says, where would we get the funding?
So I'll be facilitating the group. Lauren's going to be recording what you guys are saying, the key points and everything. The first exercise we're doing here, the first half an hour, is we're going to start off by reviewing. This group has been given 3 draft recommendations to begin with.
Conversations, thoughts, concerns, and sharing of ideas that are continuing as Hawaii prepares.
Okay, good afternoon, aloha. Okay, we were the Finance and Incentives group. So of course, based on all these recommendations, how do we do this? How do we pay for this?
The Sea Level Rise Vulnerability and Adaptation Report really provides an overview on a statewide level of the vulnerability of our state to the effects of sea level rise in terms of erosion, in terms of flooding, in terms of wave inundation over the next century. We're already seeing effects from sea level rise when we have elevated tides or king tides. People saw this all over the state. We saw it at Mapunapuna, we saw it at Kahului, we saw it at Hilo, and other areas around the state. We had abnormally high sea levels. This is really the precursor to sea level rise. It's a view into a crystal ball. showing us our future. And I think people are learning from this.
Hawaii's leadership transcends what happens here in the islands. Even though the U.S. government has officially dropped out of the sweeping Paris Climate Accord, the Aloha State is one of 16 that are plowing forward and participating on the global stage, including at a major international meeting of virtually every nation on the planet last year.
The amazing thing about this event was that the states, otherwise known as subnationals, have formed what we call a U.S. Climate Alliance. It's about 16 U.S. states that have come together, and they've said, despite the fact that the federal government wants to withdraw from the Paris Agreement, we're still in. We're still committed to reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, reducing our carbon footprint on the planet. So it was a wonderful opportunity for us to all get together as an alliance of states to show our support to address this most critical sort of threat that faces humanity.
Governors have really been leading the charge, recognizing that the United States of America cannot cede leadership in the climate area. You know, that the federal government choosing not to participate in the climate agreement is not acceptable, that states will step up and lead the charge.
After all, Hawaii is used to its independence and resilience. The coming years will test these traits as never before, on a scale we've never experienced previously. We invite you to become involved, to learn what you can do to adapt and prepare for a certain future. One where the seas will rise and keep rising well beyond our lives.